Well, good morning. It's my pleasure to call this meeting of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to order. Today is Wednesday, July 28, times 9:30 a.m. With us today are Commissioners Emily Lindley and Bobby Janecka, as well as our General Counsel, Mary Smith. I'm John Neerman, and today's meeting is a hybrid meeting, meaning that most of the participants are joining us virtually, so we appreciate you bearing with us with any technical problems that might present themselves. I'd like to remind folks who to keep their phones on mute when they're not speaking. I'd also like to remind anyone who is here only to listen that they can watch the meeting online, and that link is available on the agenda notice. For each item where argument or discussion is allowed, we will inform speakers of their time limits. Registration is now closed, but if you'd like to address the commission on a specific item, please email agenda@tceq.texas.gov with your name, affiliation, and the item you'd like to comment on, and we will do our best to accommodate that request. For those making presentations, please wait to begin your presentation until either I or our General Counsel have asked you to begin speaking, and try to remember to make sure that your line is unmuted before you do so. With that, I want to thank everyone for being present in person and virtually. And Ms. Smith, I'll ask you to please call the first item.
Item number one is application number 13488 by Aethon Energy Operating, LLC, for a temporary water use permit to divert a maximum of 3,351.2 acre-feet of water within a period of 3 years from the Adiac River in the Neches River Basin. The parties have been notified that the commissioners will not take oral argument but may ask questions. Those who have signed in will be noted for the record.
So colleagues, for hearing requests on water use applications, we're required to determine whether the requester has demonstrated a personal justiciable interest in the application. We have roughly 20 requests on this first item. However, none of the requesters hold a water right authorization, and none are located along the water course that is subject to this application. Accordingly, none show a personal interest different from the general public's. There was one request that got a little bit more attention. That was Mr. Russell's request, but that request simply identifies a concern or worry about his rental business, but we are left to speculate what the rental business is or how it might be affected by this application, and so that falls short of the demonstration that's required to show effectiveness. So colleagues, I'm inclined to deny the requests and issue the applications. Commissioner Lindley?
I'm in agreement.
Thank you. Commissioner Janecka?
I arrived at the same conclusion.
I'll entertain a motion.
I would move that we deny all hearing requests and issue application number 13488 to Aethon Energy Operating, LLC, as recommended by the Executive Director.
A second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. Ms. Smith, please call the next item.
Item number two is the application number 13487 by Aethon Energy Operating, LLC, for a temporary water use permit to divert a maximum of 3,351.2 acre-feet of water within a period of 3 years from the Adiac River in the Neches River Basin. The parties have been notified that the commission will not take oral argument but may ask questions. Those who have signed in will be noted for the record.
Colleagues, this application is more or less the same as the one we just considered in item one. However, the diversion point is about a mile downstream from that other one. The hearing requests are also identical, so my analysis is the same. And I'm going to again recommend that we deny the requests and issue.
I agree with you as well.
I'll make a second motion. I move that we deny all hearing requests and issue application number 13487 to Aethon Energy Operating, LLC, as recommended by the Executive Director.
A second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. Ms. Smith, please call the next item.
Item number three is the application by Equistar Chemicals, LP, for a major amendment and renewal of TIPD's permit number WQ002 075000 The parties have been notified that the commissioners will not take oral argument but may ask questions. Those who have signed in will be noted for the record.
Colleagues, as you know, we have a two-part analysis for considering requests for contested cases on TIPD's authorization, such as this one. We consider whether the requesters have met the procedural and substantive requirements to be entitled to a contested case. And assuming that at least one requester meets the requirements, we consider which issues are appropriate to refer to hearing. Requesters who are affected in a manner different from the general public and who have articulated personal concerns that are relevant and material to the permit and have done so both in timely comments and a timely hearing request are entitled to a hearing. And we refer issues of fact that have been timely raised by an affected person and that are relevant and material to the application. So stated differently, the issues must be within our jurisdiction on this type of application. On this item, colleagues, we have a single request. Mr. Fred Burkhart Jr. resides approximately 6 miles from the facility and owns property on the discharge route roughly 1 mile downstream from Outfall 3. He raises concerns about flooding and erosion, as well as whether a man-made ditch and Oso Creek are each a water in the state under the state definition. So based on his residence being 6 miles away, Mr. Burkhart is not affected in a manner from the general public. Whether he is an affected person based on his property downstream of Outfall 3, I think is a little bit of a closer call. In my view, it's unlikely, but we don't need to answer that question because we can resolve this based on the issues that Mr. Burkhart has raised. Flooding and erosion are property-related interests that may, for example, give rise to a claim for nuisance in state district court, but those concerns are outside of TCEQ's jurisdiction on this application. Additionally, Mr. Burkhart raises questions about whether the ditch and the creek are state waters, and that is, those are legal questions. Those are not questions of fact, so that issue is not referable. And in my view, I think it's pretty clear that both are indeed state waters as a matter of law. But in any event, we don't have a referable issue. So for want of a referable issue, I would deny this request and go ahead and issue. Commissioner Lindley?
That was a good description. I'm in agreement.
Commissioner Janeka?
Likewise.
I'll entertain a motion.
I would move that we deny all hearing requests, that we grant the renewal and major amendment of TPDES permit number WQ000207500 to Equistar Chemicals LP as recommended by the Executive Director and adopt the Executive Director's response to comments.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Ms. Smith, please call item 4.
Item 4 is the consideration of an administrative order for the McBay Oil and Gas Superfund site. The ED is the moving party and should present the matter, followed by interested persons, and finally OPIC. OGC recommends limiting parties to 3 minutes for presentations, and the ED may reserve time for rebuttal.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. On behalf of the Executive Director, I am Mark Sebo with the Litigation Division. With me are Terry Andrews and Monica Harris of the Remediation Division. This is an administrative order to conduct remedial activities for the McBay Oil and Gas State Superfund site located near Grapeland in Houston County, Texas. As part of the state Superfund process, TCEQ has completed its investigation of the site. The soils and groundwater at the site are contaminated with benzene, 1-methylnaphthalene, and 2-methylnaphthalene. The groundwater plume is also contaminated with total petroleum hydrocarbons. The soil contamination is below human health protective concentration levels, and the contaminated groundwater plume is currently stable. After appropriate notice and opportunity to comment, and in accordance with the Texas Risk Reduction Program rules, the Executive Director selected the remedy of an on- and off-site plume management zone that will manage on-site soils exceeding groundwater protection levels and prevent access to the contaminated groundwater plume through institutional controls. The remedy includes long-term data collection and analysis to monitor the plume and ensure stability. The 148 potentially responsible parties named in the order were given the opportunity to fund or conduct remedial activities at the site. No good faith offers were received, therefore there are no agreeing respondents. The Executive Director respectfully requests that the Commission issue this administrative order pursuant to Chapter 361 of the Texas Health and Safety Code. We are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sebo. I have a few just to sort of set the table a little bit, and they're about the petroleum exclusion. And let me try to articulate my understanding of it, and you can tell me if I've got it right or not. There is a crude oil. Crude oil is excluded from the definition of hazardous waste, but the exclusion does not apply to tank bottom, sludge, rinse, or other non-indigenous contaminants that might be in crude oil. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So does the sale of uncontaminated skim oil by itself create any Superfund liability? And this is a hypothetical, just by itself.
I think we would have to take the totality of the circumstances into question before answering that. We would have to look at the specifics of it.
Can you think off the top of your head of any examples where the sale of uncontaminated skim oil would create liability? And again, in my hypo, I'm talking about skim oil and not about sludge or tank bottoms or rinse water or skim oil that is contaminated with non-indigenous constituents.
To the best of my knowledge, the sale of completely uncontaminated skim oil would not create liability.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sebo. I appreciate that. Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Sebo? Commissioner
No,
Lindley?
thank you.
Commissioner Janeka?
Thank you, Mr. Sebo. I'm just wondering if you could comment at all on any differences in the review of the potentially responsible parties. What can you offer as a way of commentary or explanation for where we have a slightly different number of potentially responsible parties named before us on the matter today versus when our agencies or predecessor agencies last acted on this site?
Yes, several responsible parties were removed prior to bringing this site to agenda after working with those responsible parties and representatives for those responsible parties. The TCQ determined that we did not have evidence sufficient to list them as responsible parties on this order. Additionally, there were several orders signed in 1990, 1997, and 1999 that required respondents to perform work for and at the site. And those orders included releases of liability for those agreeing respondents in return for their work. Those respondents performed their work, and TCQ and its predecessor agencies released them from the list as a result.
I appreciate that. Can you speak to what level of review or what decisions we made in terms of where new companies or new entities are now before us that had not necessarily been involved or implicated as potential responsible parties in the past? Did we have access to more records in the more recent reviews that we've been able to perform, or what factors might you comment on in that regard?
I think, to the best of my knowledge, there have not been any significant additions to the list in the last decade or so. A voluminous review of the records was performed in the 80s when we compiled the first full list of responsible parties that we have been using since. But to my knowledge, there have not been any significant additions to the list in recent years.
Thank you very much.
And I apologize. And I want to note also that there's been an extensive review of the site records, relevant documents, and applicable law in advance of listing the parties currently on this order before you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Sebo. You'll have some rebuttal time at the end if you want it. We may have some more questions for you as well, but let's hear from the interested persons. I know we have at least a few signed in. Let's begin with Mr. Johnson. Are you there, sir?
Thank you, Chairman. Finding my mute button on my phone. Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, Public Interest Counsel. My name is Rod Johnson. I'm an attorney in Austin with the firm of Enoch Keever, and I represent Goldston Oil Corporation. I'm going to do the best I can to keep my time short. But we first want to just thank you for the opportunity to comment and, for the record, provide a very limited reply to a couple of issues, among others, that we want to address in the Executive Director's filing last Friday. As you probably tell from the record of the objection Goldston filed, we respectfully disagree with the ED's recommendation to include Goldston. Quite frankly, the evidence in the file and the truth of the matter is that Goldston has no waste disposal connection with this site. We recently learned of the term tank bottoms was being used recently in the Executive Director's filing. If we talk about evidence review, there's nothing to point to Goldston's sale of crude oil to Valco in 1986 as anything other than crude oil, because it met the definition of marketable crude oil under the Railroad Commission, which allows for up to 2% BS&W. That's a calculated number on the record that TCEQ has in its file. We explained that to the staff very recently, and we appreciated that opportunity to engage. But that, along with proof of fair market value check paid to Goldston for that oil, is the only evidence of a connection between Goldston and Valco. And quite simply, it was simply the sale of crude oil. And when we say skim oil, we're not talking about skim oil from a oil spill or some other unusual situation. We're talking about oil that, let me just back up. Every drop of oil is essentially has to be separated physically through, for lack of a better word, API separator or skimming. The particular oil in this case was skimmed off of produced water before that water was managed further down. That type of oil is the same as the first drop of oil that comes out. It's no different. In fact, again, the evidence shows that it's nothing more and nothing less than regular old crude oil. Indigenous compounds are the only thing in there as far as any of the evidence shows, BS&W. BS&W is not tank bottoms. Tank bottoms are a sludgy, heavy, tar-like conglomeration of basic sediments, water, that have settled out in storage tanks over long periods of time. It has to be removed physically in virtually all cases in order to manage it. Am I done?
Mr. Johnson, let's give you a little bit more time. I want to hear the rest of your argument. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Let me do this. I think I've belabored it enough. I think you all have picked up on the issue in your discussions or questioning with the staff. The two things I want to address is, number one, Goldston did engage with TNRCC, was told verbally, because you don't get a letter from the agency that says, hey, you're out, that they were out. And this issue came back up last year. We tried time and again to engage with the staff. We're promised a written response, and the only response in writing that we've ever seen is last Friday. That's a little frustrating, but it's a big job for the staff. Nevertheless, this is where we're at. The second issue is that the ED's response implies a theory of liability, that Goldston's sale transaction was a sham, that it not only tried to illegally dispose of tank bottoms, but that they continue to lie about it here. That's the only implication you can get from that.
Mr. Johnson, let me interject. If I can interject on that point.
Yes, please.
I read that is a fair point of law. The way I read it was
yes,
was a little rough, and I don't imagine that your client had engaged in a sham. For what it's worth, I may have been reading that with some sensitivity to how you were reading it, and I don't have any reason to think that y'all were engaged in a sham operation. Just to put that to rest, although I think it is an accurate statement of the law.
Commissioner or Chairman, I absolutely appreciate that, and I know my client who's listening appreciates that. I can't tell you how much we thank you for that recognition. It was a very serious allegation without any evidence, because there is no evidence, because that's not what it was. With that, I am going to simply just request that we're fine with the order as is without Goldston on it, and appreciate all of your time. Thank you. Happy to answer any other questions.
Yeah, Mr. Johnson, I do have a question. The executive director had identified, and it's referenced in the memo, numerous barrels, 165 barrels that included, among other things, some sediment, which to my, from my sort of layman's perspective on this, sounds different from skimmed oil. Can you speak to that at all? Why there might be sediment in a drum, or do you dispute that evidence?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Thank you. It's a good question. And if you're not familiar with separation of oil in primary instance prior to marketing, it may not make sense. BS&W accounts for both water and sediment that is in produced oil as it comes to the surface, and produced oil as it is separated from produced water. It's entrained sediment that's suspended very finely in some cases, but it's generally mostly water. And what happens is, when you sell and market a barrel of crude, in this case 165 barrels, when it is received, at some point there is basically a little centrifuge sample that's done that centrifuges the oil, separates out the small amounts of sediment and water, measured, calculated, and what you see in the column that you would see if you have a chance to look at the Railroad Commission report that Valco filed, is that is a calculated number. And in Railroad Commission parlance, Information Administration parlance, and in industry parlance, BS&W is a normal constituent of crude oil that has to be netted out of the total crude when you report it. So what was sold was 165 barrels. Centrifuge test is done. Report 163 net barrels of crude to the Railroad Commission and to BS&W. BS&W is not further separated out as to how much of that is sediment and how much of that is water. In the Quitman field in East Texas, my client notes that it's a hard rock formation and lake developed. This is a long field. It's been around for a long time. It produces more water than others. But the definition of marketable crude oil at the Railroad Commission is no more than 2% BS&W. And quite frankly, if there had not been any BS&W reported for that load, that might be suspicious. But this amounts to 1%. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Johnson? Commissioner Lindley?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Janeka?
I just appreciate you taking the time to help answer some of these questions for us. Thank you.
We appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Let's hear next from Robin Morse. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Robin Morse with the law firm of Crane, Caton, and James here in Houston. I represent Continental Can Company, who is one of the designated PRPs. This case, frankly, came to me fairly recently, and I've been trying to catch up on it. But I wanted to first compliment the executive director and his staff on the remedy selected. It seems to be the appropriate remedy based on the alternatives considered. I did have some questions, and I apparently I understand that the Continental Can Company did not participate because they may not have been notified or given the opportunity to be involved in the earlier administrative orders or the releases that came with that. I'm a little concerned with the timing that is now before the company. That is 10 days to indicate that the respondents are going to carry out and be participating parties. I think, frankly, I'd like to see, if possible, given the amount of time that's gone on this site, that 10 days changed in the order to something like 30 to 45 days, because my client, I think, would, based on Superfund law, we'd like to have the opportunity to be a performing party. So that's one change. I'm not sure why the releases were given before the entire remediation was completed here in this case. It looks like there were rather substantial companies that were given the opportunity to go out during just the assessment phase of this site. But anyway, I'd like just to ask that the order be revised to allow more than just 10 days from the time it's effective. And I'm not talking about a year, 6 months, or even 3 months, 90 days. But we would like to have the opportunity to contact and follow up with the other indicated parties. I think there's 128, 148, whatever it is, and that would be our one request. And again, our compliments on the remedy selected, but we'd like to be one of the performing parties at this stage.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. I appreciate that. Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Morse?
No, thank you.
No, thanks.
Okay, let's hear next from Mr. Steve Wells. Are you there, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Steve Wells. I've been asked to address the commission on behalf of Mission Petroleum Carriers. I believe I can be quite brief. Our objection is to finding of fact number 4. It says the following persons are PRPs referred to herein as responsible parties following conclusion of law number 1 for the solid waste and or hazardous substances at the facility. Following that, on the next page, Mission Petroleum Carriers is listed as one of the responsible parties. Going back to the rationale that the responsible parties are responsible for solid waste and or hazardous substances at the facility, for Mission Petroleum Carriers, that is simply not true. We have requested every single document, every single shred of evidence that the commission possesses regarding Mission Petroleum Carriers, and what we found is that they are associated with and only with 8 shipments of crude oil petroleum, not otherwise indexed by name. There's no, and as has already been established in this meeting, crude oil petroleum is not a solid waste and it's not a hazardous substance. It's specifically excluded. Some of the documentation provided by TCQ is invoices proving that Mission Petroleum Carriers was paid for the crude oil. And the rest of it, there are weigh bills for each shipment identifying the product as crude oil and only crude oil. And there's no reference anywhere in anything that TCQ has provided to indicate that solid waste or hazardous substance was included in any activities associated with Mission Petroleum Carriers. And that's really all I have to say. We ask respectfully that Mission Petroleum Carriers be removed from the list of PRPs and RPs, and we have no objection to anything else in the docket item.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wells. I understand the argument. I appreciate it. Commissioner Lindley, any questions
No
for
questions.
Mr. Wells?
Thank you.
Commissioner Janetka?
Likewise, none.
Okay. I need just a moment. Let's hear next from the Office of Public Interest Counsel.
Good morning, Vic McWhorter here. OPIC has no objection to the order.
Thank you, Mr. McWhorter. Mr. Sebo, I think you're up next, and I've got a few questions for you. And let's begin with Mr. Morse's request, which I think is seems to be a modest request, but I want to ask you if it presents any problems if we were to allow an additional 20 days, not 10 days, but 30 days in this order.
The order contemplates that both that respondents to the order can become performing parties, and it allows for time extensions to be granted.
Okay, so that's a feature of the order as it is, and that would be at the discretion of the executive director rather than something that we would change in the order. I guess that's what I'm hearing. Does that sound about right?
That's correct.
Okay. Colleagues, here's my thought on that. I would I think I'm all right with the order the way it is, if that's the case, and not changing the order, but 10 days does seem like it's pretty tight, so I would encourage the executive director to exercise their discretion to give that additional time. I think Mr. Morse's request was entirely reasonable, and those would be my instructions from the dais, unless you all, do you see it the same, or would you want to change the order, or what are your thoughts?
I'm with you. I think the request is reasonable to allow a few more than 10 days. I don't know. I could go either way. We could just kind of, as you said, strongly encourage the executive director to do that, or if we wanted to make a motion that they, definitely need to allow more time, I'd be comfortable with that as well. But they probably get the gist of how we feel. So,
Commissioner Janetka?
I think I'm in strong agreement. I was just searching through the order to see what 10-day requirement that Mr. Morse might have referred to, and I believe under that ordering provision 8, it does clearly lay out a short deadline, but I'm encouraged to hear Mr. Sebo's description of the executive director's flexibility in extending that time as necessary, and I think that certainly gives an appropriate path forward for any of these potential responsible parties that want to engage in more thorough discussions with the executive director in relation to that potential action or decision to step up as performing parties. I'll note that this is certainly an understandable matter for people to be a bit not perplexed by, but to be perhaps somewhat caught off guard, where it's a lengthy history of the site, and though we did, I believe I see in the record here that we notified parties back in 2020 about some of the most recent updates to this order. I still think that it's certainly entirely understandable for private companies doing business for years and years, not necessarily having these transactions and records at all close to their memory, to let a notification pass them by without acting or responding. So I do acknowledge the executive director's position that parties and PRPs were notified, and deadlines came and went without them availing themselves the opportunity to provide written comments at that time. But I'm with y'all. I see it. This is a very appropriate place to encourage some flexibility from ED staff.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Sebo, I'm going to give you a chance to use your rebuttal time in a moment, and I've got maybe a question for you, but before I launch into that, colleagues, TIPRO had filed a letter in the backup raising concerns about how we're approaching this, and I did want to respond to that because I very much appreciate the letter. The way I view what the executive director has done here is to really try to follow existing law and precedent and not create a new policy or new interpretation of the petroleum exclusion. You know, they're looking at existing authorities and trying to determine which part of that falls within the exclusion and which falls outside of it. And the July 23rd memo, the memo from last Friday, spells out some of that's in the backup material, spells out some of those authorities. So, what we're trying to do is just be consistent with how we've approached these issues historically. So with that, Mr. Sebo, I want to give you a chance to offer any rebuttal, but I want you to try to include in that a response to Mr. Johnson and Mr. Wells' comments that what their clients are responsible for at the site, they're claiming is strictly within the exception, and the executive director has clearly taken a different interpretation. And so, to the extent you can speak to the evidence, record evidence around that, I would appreciate it. And with that, Mr. Sebo, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. First, I want to note that regardless of whether there was a sale disguised as a disposal, our evidence shows that Goldston, in particular, has liability under the arranger theory of Superfund liability. I also want to note that TCQ has jurisdiction over the site waste pursuant to state law, as well as the memorandum of understanding between the TCQ and the Railroad Commission. And in determining the responsible parties for this site, staff reviewed all available information and applicable law, and staff determined that this waste, in particular Goldston's and Mission Petroleum Carriers, shown on their evidence, that waste does not fall under the petroleum exclusion.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Sebo, can you expand a little bit on that last point? And just to put the question another way, if we move forward with this order and it's in district court and you have PRP saying, hey, everything that we're connected with at the site falls within the exclusion, that's going to be their argument. What is our argument and what is our evidence? I mean, let me interrupt. Our argument clearly is, well, there was some portion of that fell outside of the exclusion, and so my question is, what evidence are you going to point to?
Thank you. We have evidence pointing to shipments from Goldston to the site, as well as shipments arranged for by Mission Petroleum to the site that contained contaminants beyond the boundaries of the petroleum exclusion.
Okay. Mr. Sebo, can you go any deeper than that, or is that in terms of types of contaminants or specific documentary evidence that you would point to?
Yes, specifically with regard to BS&W and other contaminants of concern found at the site. But I'll also note that there is litigation potential on this site. So that is guiding my responses as well.
My somewhat limited experience in Superfund cases, state Superfund, is there's almost always litigation. So I'm fully anticipating that, and I fully expect that the PRPs will have a chance to review these issues and hammer them out in front of state district court. I just want to make sure that that we have a record that supports our action once that the agency does once we all get there. But I appreciate your responses. Mr. Sebo, do you have anything else to offer in rebuttal?
No further comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Lindley, any questions, thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm probably as comfortable as I can be adopting the ED's administrative order, what's in front of us today, but I'm very glad we had the discussion. I'm grateful for all the parties that participated today. It was helpful.
I think I'm in the same place. Commissioner Janeka?
I am at equal parts pleased and well, I just have to note with some curiosity, this is the first Superfund matter that I've seen come before me since I've come to this commission, and I just appreciate and want to acknowledge the complexity and the history that it reaches back to and encompasses many questions of legal arguments with high consequence based on records that really start to fade quickly with time, the passage of time. So I appreciate the difficulty in our agency acting in the space. I'm encouraged to see that this is the last chapter of this site's Superfund story, I hope, and it seems that Executive Director has appropriately taken a closer look at this in light of our updates to significantly the adoption of the TURP rules, the Texas Risk Reduction Program, and I think that provides a very solid basis for us that's consistent with all the other Superfund sites in the state that we've taken more recent actions on. I'm ready to move forward on it.
I think we're ready for a motion then.
I will swoop in and I move that we adopt the Executive Director's proposed administrative order concerning the McBay Oil and Gas State Superfund site.
I second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Ms. Smith, please call the next item.
Item 5 is the consideration for adoption of 2 total maximum daily loads for indicator bacteria at Corpus Christi Beaches, Cole Park, and Ropes Park of the Nueces Rio Grande Coastal Basin. The Executive Director's staff is here to present the item.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. For the record, I am Kerry Neiman with the Water Quality Planning Division in the Office of Water. With me today are Nicole Hall with the Total Maximum Daily Load Program and Aubrey Huelka with the Environmental Law Division. Today, the Executive Director is respectfully requesting the consideration for final adoption of 2 total maximum daily loads for indicator bacteria in Corpus Christi Bay Beaches, Cole Park, and Ropes Park. The team deals cover 2 assessment units in 1 stream segment within Nueces County. A stakeholder group was formed with balanced representation of all interested parties and was tasked with providing input on the team deal document. The development of this document included an active public participation effort and balanced stakeholder group coordinated by the Texas A&M University Corpus Christi Center for Coastal Studies. The success of this project is due to the collaborative effort of the individuals and organizations that put in the time to develop this document to improve water quality in their community. The Executive Director respectfully requests the adoption of the total maximum daily loads. Permission is also requested to make non-substantive and clerical corrections. Thank you, and we're available to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Neiman. I have none. Commissioner Lindley, any questions?
No questions, thanks.
Commissioner Janeka?
None.
And Ms. Smith, there's no one signed in to speak?
That's correct.
Mr. McWhirter, what do you think?
OPIC recommends adoption of 2 total maximum daily loads for indicator bacteria at Corpus Christi Beaches, Cole Park, and Ropes Park as presented by the Executive Director.
Thank you. I agree with that, colleagues. I want to begin, though, by thanking all the stakeholders, including the Coordination Committee, the City of Corpus Christi, the Coastal Bend Bays Foundation, and agency staff for all of their work in developing these TMDLs. They appear, from my perspective, to be technically sound. I think they're otherwise appropriate and that we should move forward.
I agree. I can make a motion if I don't want to cut you off.
Thank you. I'll just add on, heartily second what you said, Chairman, but also add on, I'm eager to see the implementation plan for this once it comes back around, but I would reiterate your thanks to those stakeholder groups who were so critical in helping develop the plan, or not plan, the the TMDL, I think we'll be counting on them disproportionately to help engage and communicate with the public, seeing some of the limitations in levers that our agency may be able to point to pull to address the indicators in this particular, these two watersheds. So.
Yeah, it's somewhat unique in that there's no wastewater treatment facilities in this particular watershed, so we're controlling stormwater exclusively. So it's a different set of challenges.
Indeed. No other comments. Thanks.
With that, I will move that we adopt the 2 total maximum daily loads for indicator bacteria in Corpus Christi Beaches, Cole Park, and Ropes Park in the Nueces Rio Grande Coastal Basin as recommended by the Executive Director.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the enforcement docket.
Items 6 through 18 are our enforcement docket, and the Executive Director's staff is here to present these matters.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. For the record, my name is Melissa Cordell of the Enforcement Division, and with me today is Susan Jablonski, also of the Enforcement Division, and Charmaine Backins of the Litigation Division, representing the Executive Director. Pending before you are items 6 through 18. The total assessed administrative penalties are $508,224, with $34,413 deferred, $172,500 applied for supplemental environmental projects, and $301,311 to the general revenue. We respectfully request approval of these items and are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Cordell. I have none. Commissioner Lindley, any questions?
No questions. Thank
Commissioner
you.
Janeka?
No, thank you.
Ms. Smith, is there anyone signed in to speak?
We have people signed in on 6 and 12, but they are signed in if you have any questions and not asking to address the commission.
Thank you. Mr. McWhorter, what are your thoughts?
My office reviewed these items, and we recommend approval of the orders as presented by the Executive Director.
Thank you. Colleagues, I agree. I've reviewed these items, and I think it's appropriate to move forward with the enforcement docket.
I agree.
I agree as well, and I would only want to take the opportunity, noting that we have someone from item 12 here today. I did note and want to recognize good things where we see them as much as I tend to comment on troubling things where I see them. I'm very pleased to see in reviewing the matter for item 12 with the City of Sugar Land that compliance SEP had already been completed and was indicated to our agency at this time, and that's always something that I'm really pleased to see and really find helpful for us to help explain and engage with the public in the context of enforcement and this enforcement docket. I think it's always difficult for our agency to come before the public and point to many of these instances and documents or allegations that reflect past occurrences. Whenever we have action that's quick and timely, especially with a public water system serving the public in this manner, I'm just glad to see that. So wanted to say kudos and thank you so much for the representative of that entity here today before us to answer questions. Thanks, even though we didn't have any.
Both of them, a representative from the city as well as their attorney. We appreciate you being here and available for questions. And ditto what you said. Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Janeka.
With that, I can make a motion. I would move that we adopt items 6 through 18 as recommended today by the Executive Director.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 The motion carries. Ms. Smith, please call the next item.
Item 19 is the consideration of the monthly enforcement report. The Executive Director's staff is here to present.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. My name is Melissa Cordell of the Enforcement Division, and with me are Susan Jablonski of the Enforcement Division and Charmaine Backins of the Litigation Division. We are here to present the monthly enforcement report for fiscal year 2021 through May. There were 697 effective administrative orders issued, and of those, 96 contained supplemental environmental projects. These orders assessed a total of $7,811,607 in penalties, with a payable amount of $4,898,996. $1,652,414 are to be paid towards supplemental environmental projects. 11,449 notices of violation have been issued through either our field offices or review of self-reported data in our central office, and 1,367 enforcement action referrals have been received. There are 1,671 pending administrative orders with 265 cases that are on the backlog. 204 cases are pending at the Attorney General's office for representation in district court, and 12 judgments have been issued. 2,021 cases are being tracked for compliance. We've included for review a summary of OCE investigative activities for fiscal years 2019, 20, and 21. We are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Cordell. I have none. Commissioner Lindley, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Janeka?
None, thank you.
Ms. Smith, no one signed in to speak?
No one signed in.
Thank you. Mr. McWhorter, I want to give you an opportunity to comment as well.
I appreciate the report. I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Cordell, thank you very much. No action is necessary on this item, so Ms. Smith, I'll ask you to call the next item.
Item 20 is the consideration of agency post-incident response actions related to the February 2021 severe winter storm, including plans to evaluate factors that impacted public water system response and recovery actions. The Executive Director's staff is here to present.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. For the record, I am Jaime Garza, Regional Director of the Heart Engine and Laredo Regional Offices in the Office of Compliance and Enforcement. I am here to provide the monthly update for the agency's after-action review of Winter Storm Uri. The project team is continuing to conduct roundtable discussions throughout the month of July. We have completed 5 of the 6 scheduled roundtable discussions. To date, more than 70 participants have joined the discussion. The last roundtable discussion is scheduled for Tuesday, August the 3rd. Through these discussions, we have been able to have an open dialogue with water system operators, administrators, operating companies, and other stakeholders about their experiences, including the greatest impacts and where they experienced the biggest successes during and after the storm. We have been gathering valuable information from the participants as well as from our partner state agencies, the Public Utility Commission and Texas Division of Emergency Management. The discussions have focused on adequacy of power resources, impacts to water system infrastructure, communication pathways, and what is needed for systems to better prepare for and respond to future weather-related events. During the discussions, participants stated that the greatest impact to their system was losing electricity and the need to be identified as critical load with the electrical providers. Participants also discussed the challenges due to water loss through the distribution system and customer leaks, dealing with the significant volume of customer calls and questions, and boil water notice issuance challenges. The project team is continuing the literature review of regulations and guidance documents maintained by other states, as well as water sector organizations that pertain to weatherization and resiliency. The project team has received responses from more than 10 states. The team is evaluating the information provided for each state's regulations and best practices that may be beneficial for public water systems in Texas. The project team is continuing to review and summarize the public water system survey results. We have received more than 350 responses to the public water system survey to date. Training events began this month focusing on preparing public water systems for future natural disasters. We partnered with EPA to conduct a resiliency workshop on July 22nd, and additional resiliency training took place on July 27th and July 28th. More training is scheduled for August 17th and 18th. Public water systems can find information about future training events on the Winter Storm webpage. There will also be dedicated presentations and training events at the Public Drinking Water Conference August 10th and 11th, including training for the new requirements related to statewide emergency preparedness plans. That concludes our monthly update. We welcome any feedback that you may have, and I am available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Garza. I don't have any questions, but I do want to express my appreciation for all of the great work that staff is putting into this effort, and also thank the water system operators who've participated in our roundtable discussions. What I've heard in those discussions, it's reminded me of just the lengths that those operators and their teams had to go to try to maintain water service and restore water service. And in many cases, it was I mean, heroic. I don't have another word for it. So, nevertheless, we had, roughly half, like more than half of every Texan on a boil water notice, and so, and hundreds of thousands without water at the meter, and many more without water downstream of the meter. So it's an enormous problem, and it deserves this kind of attention. But I just wanted to express that appreciation. Commissioner Lindley, any questions or comments from Mr. Garza?
I appreciate the report. I just had one or two quick questions. I was just curious about more than anything. I believe you called them the resiliency trainings that are happening right now. I'm just curious, one, if you can tell me, how many people are really participating in those, and just be curious to know. And two, how are we getting the word out about that? How are we communicating that? I fully believe we are, and trying to spread the word. I'm just curious about how we're doing it.
Hi, thank you, Commissioner. We do have a really good email group that Office of Water uses to communicate this training, and we also have this training on our website dedicated to the after action review. I unfortunately do not have the numbers of attendees that we've seen over the last couple of trainings that we've had there.
That's fine. I was just curious more than anything, but I feel like I say this all the time, but if there's anything the three of us can do to help get the word out about that, Office Water or OCE, y'all let us know.
Well, it's not going to be an
hour.
Go ahead, Mr. Garza.
Sorry, I was just going to comment that during the roundtable discussions, we've had positive feedback that the email notification that we're sending is working really well.
Great. I would think that would be the best route. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to try to make a joke, which is always a terrible idea, but I'll try it anyway. An hour deep into our agenda is not going to reach very many people.
I do agree with that, yes.
Commissioner Janetka, any questions or comments for Mr. Garza?
I just want to start by expressing my pleasure at hearing from you, Mr. Garza, one of our regional directors. Hearing directly from the regional offices is always, I think, a valuable avenue of our agency's personnel to really hear from directly in terms of your staying closest to many of the regulated entities down in the Valley in particular, up in Laredo, where I know you split time between the two regional offices. But I wonder if you might be able to speak to wearing two hats in this sense right here, where you and your offices, your regional offices, are assisting our agencies' central outreach efforts and conversations with the public water systems around the state. I think that it may help us better understand some of the challenges our agency staff have encountered in trying to reach out to regulated entities saying, hey, please tell us openly and honestly and in lurid detail everything you encountered and experienced so we can learn from it. Can you speak to the differences in that type of conversation that we're actively reaching out and seeking to have with public water systems, how that compares to your standing relationship and your staff's typical posture in your relationship with the regulated entities? What challenges have we encountered as an agency in reaching out to those systems? And can you speak to what your office in particular, or what your role in relationship with these regulated entities, how that might have come into effect in any way, shape, or form in helping support this ongoing conversation?
Yes, I think I'll first say that the makeup of this group internally within the agency, of course, includes staff and up to and including directors from our Office of Water, and also includes investigators and even directors within the Office of Compliance and Enforcement and even the region. So it's a good mix of staff. We also have staff from our critical infrastructure division, and it's shown to be very effective as far as what our office of staff have been observing, some of the concerns that they've received, and also provide our perspective. From my perspective, a lot of that came to the surface is just concerns related to boil water notices, where we may not have facilities that would be typically issuing boil water notices, but then during this instance, we had more than 40% of the facilities having to issue a boil water notices, perhaps where they haven't done so in the past. One of the good things, and the chairman, made some comments expressing his gratitude, and I share the same comments towards the regulated entities that are participating in these meetings. But during the roundtable discussions, we've had those entities particularly thank the region for their participation, thank the regional staff for their availability. The regional staff, the investigators, visit with these facilities, probably yearly, if not more often. They're very familiar with them. They know each other on a first name basis, and they have, and a lot of times they have cell phone numbers to these within each other. So that proved very helpful during this whole event, and I'm thankful that we all have a seat and a part in these roundtable discussions.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that, and I certainly want to commend you and all of your colleagues out in the regions to continue to reach out to public water systems and invite them and coax them to come in and speak more candidly, more freely with us. I was grateful to be able to participate, sit in one of the roundtable discussions, and was really a little dismayed not to see more water systems involved. But on the flip side, I think that it was a really impressively open and detailed discussion, and I was very impressed by the level of understanding that was really reached in trying to discuss many of the challenges and some of the victories that we're seeing through the winter storm, and how our agency can take those pitfalls or shortcuts for what worked and better amplify that so that other public water systems with very strapped resources and challenges, and particularly the one you alluded to in terms of the public water system boil water notice exercise done at scale, is a unique challenge that our agency perhaps may need to be very deliberate in how we try to craft a standing, scalable solution that we recognize is only seldom, hopefully, God willing, only ever rarely in lifetimes used. So how do you make sure it works the few times you need it? It's a conundrum we see too often in public policy space. So I just appreciate your efforts and all of our region staff efforts in supporting this across the state.
Well, certainly with respect to getting systems off boil water notices, I was impressed with our agency's ad hoc response to it in terms of lining up labs and transportation of samples to labs in order so that piece of it wouldn't be a material bottleneck. So, so we'll have some practice for next time. Yeah, hopefully there won't be a next time. Well, Mr. Garza, thank you again. Colleagues, anything else on this item? Ms. Smith, no one signed in to speak?
That's correct.
And Mr. McWhirter, what are your thoughts?
I just will say I'm really impressed with all the efforts staff's making in outreach and training, and I appreciate the updates. So thank you.
Thank you. And there's no action necessary on this item, so Ms. Smith, I'll ask you to call the next items.
Items 21 through 24 are for closed session. The commission will not meet in closed session today.
The time is 10:33. We are adjourned.